My Govanen. Welcome to the Tolkien Lore Channel. I'm the Tolkien Geek, and if you've watched my channel for any length of time, you probably know that Faramir is one of my favorite characters from the Lord of the Rings. He pretty much epitomizes, in a lot of ways, the ideal man in my mind, and so in this video, I want to talk about a particular aspect of that which kind of occurred to me recently, which is Faramir is kind of the perfect gentleman, and I want to explore the different aspects of his character that bear this out and show how, behaving the way Faramir does is kind of a really good guidebook to just behaving well with other people in general. So let's take a look at it. Of course, one of the hallmarks of being a gentleman is that you are courteous with other people, and Faramir is exemplary in this particular respect. When we first meet him, he basically comes on the hobbits in the woods of Ithilien, and he at first doesn't really have time to interact with them because he has to deal with a bunch of, evil men moving through the woods. And so he kind of leaves them in the care of some other men. But already he's showing some degree of courtesy with them. He's being polite in his speech and whatnot. And he's also just not killing them outright, even though technically, practically anybody walking around in Ithilien is kind of fair game to be killed under the laws of Gondor since they're at war. Later, of course, he then interacts a lot with Frodo, and he's basically interrogating him, trying to figure out why he's in Ithilien in the first place. Sam misses out on the first part of this conversation, but when he wakes up, he kind of gathers where they're at and is listening in, and, Faramir is being, firm, but he's not being rude. He's not being, just abusive of Frodo or anything like that. And so he's, again, showing some degree of courtesy here as well. And this kind of develops over time when we start seeing more of it and more concrete examples of it. So, for instance, later on, Faramir will end up having to blindfold Frodo and Sam before taking them to the hideout where his men stay. And he, before he does this, he basically says, "I'm sorry I have to do this, but we have to keep this place hidden." And Frodo and Sam don't have a problem with it. You may remember, if you've read the books, that and again, you really have to disregard everything about the movies in regards to this video, because practically everything Faramir does is different, with one exception, which I will mention. But in the books, they also had to be blindfolded when going through Lothlorien, at least for a period of their trip. And Frodo and Sam basically say, well, we've done this before, it's no big deal. But Faramir is kind of treating them with kid gloves, and he's apologizing for doing what he has to do because he sees that they're not a threat, and he's trying to treat them as nicely as he can. Another remark that kind of happens around the same time, one of his men reporting back from, kind of scouting out after they've routed the enemy from the area. A lot of the men go out and kind of scout around, make sure there's nothing left. One of them comes back and tells him that he saw a strange animal or something. It turns out, of course, it's Gollum, but Faramir and his men don't know anything about Gollum, but he basically, says that he's, found this thing and doesn't really know what it is, and he didn't want to shoot at it because Faramir had told them previously, don't just kill anything just because. And that gives us an insight into Faramir as well, which will become a little more relevant a bit later on for a different subtopic, but I just thought it worth mentioning here as well. Later on, of course, we see kind of the most powerful examples of his courtesy. We see him not killing Gollum despite being very, very, aware of the fact that Gollum is a bad dude, and also the fact that Gollum has done something which really by law does merit death under, Gondor's current at war footing, but he lets him live for Frodo's sake, and even though he's really nervous about Frodo doing what he's planning to do. So that's also a huge courtesy in one sense, but the two things that I think really highlight his character are a couple interactions he has with Sam. At one point he mentions, for instance, that the Shire must be a really great place because, gardeners seem to be held in high honor there, which of course he's getting a really out of context view because Frodo and Sam, in a lot of other contexts, the master-servant relationship that they have would probably not have developed into the friendship that they have, and so Faramir is seeing a out of context view of that. but that also tells you something about his character. Not only is he paying Sam a huge compliment by saying that, it's good that you're held in high honor as a gardener, but the mere fact that he thinks that gardening is something worthy of honor is also, an insight into his character. But to me, one of the best ones, and this is kind of what kicked my my thought process off that started this video. There's also a point where right after the whole issue of the ring gets revealed, and Faramir, uh, unlike in the movie, Faramir immediately says, "I don't want it. I'm not going to take it. I don't want anything to do with it." Samwise tells him, as he does in the movie, uh, you've shown your quality the very highest. And Faramir, in the movie, this is actually where Faramir mentions the thing about gardeners being treated in high honor, which is, they kind of misplaced it a bit. Because in the book, what he says is, no, the praise of the praiseworthy is above all rewards, but I haven't done anything that I had no inclination to do anyway. But that phrase, the praise of the praiseworthy is above all rewards, here again we see Faramir praising Sam, because he is saying that Sam himself is praiseworthy. So much so that Sam, who is a humble gardener and servant back in his own little world of the Shire, his praise of Faramir is better than any other reward. Faramir, who is the son of the steward of the greatest kingdom of men in the West, better than any reward he could receive. And so he is really piling it on Sam here in a lot of ways by, really elevating Sam and treating him really nice, being very courteous in this respect. He's not just outwardly, being mushy all over him, but everything he says is just very, very courteous and genteel, and very, he's always trying to show merit where merit is due. He's giving Sam his credit where it's due, and basically everything we see Faramir do is all about, kind of being nice to other people. Now, there's an aspect of this too, which is kind of slightly a different topic, but he is not in any way he's not a respecter of persons, you might say. He doesn't favor some people over others because of their status. We can clearly see this in regards to Sam, because Sam is definitely not high status. And we can also see the flip side of it too, because when Sam, for instance, first wakes up and sees Faramir interrogating Frodo, at some point he jumps in and gets all huffy because Faramir seems to be a little more pointed than he wants him to be. And Faramir basically tells him off and says, "Don't speak before your master, who is wiser than you are." Now, he's not just putting Sam down for the purpose of putting him down, but he is willing to basically call him out for his foolishness to the extent that it is foolish. And he does this with other people too. I mean, Faramir does, less so in the book than in the movies, but he does kind of have some daddy issues with Denethor. He is very much always wanting to get his father's approval. But he's even willing to kind of tell Denethor off a couple times, because at one point he even says to Denethor, "Let me remind you whose idea it was for Boromir to go on this mission. It wasn't mine." So he's basically kind of pushing back against Denethor, kind of trying to say, "I wish Boromir was here instead of you worthless," because Denethor always treats Faramir like trash. And yet Faramir, he doesn't get disrespectful, but he does push back. And so that's another aspect of this, where he's not per se showing courtesy, but he's not showing courtesy only to those that he kind of has to, and then not showing it to those that he doesn't. He goes both ways with both. And so I think that's an important aspect of him being courteous, is the fact that he's capable of doing it with everybody, but he's also capable of being, I don't want to use the word discourteous, because it's not discourteous per se. It's just not being nicer than he needs to be to people even who are in authority over him, both as his parent and as the ruling Lord of Gondor. So that's the aspect of his, his courteousness. Now let's look at some other aspects of Faramir that make him very much a model as a gentleman. So going back to that comment about one of the men who saw Gollum and didn't shoot him, Faramir, of course, points out there that Faramir said earlier, which is repeated by the guy, that he doesn't want them going around just shooting animals for no particular cause. And this gets into the aspect of Faramir that's kind of his discretion. discretion in every sense of the word. He's very careful about making choices, careful about what he reveals, what he doesn't reveal, what he, gets into. He's not going to dig into anybody's business unnecessarily. Like I said earlier, he does interrogate Frodo because he's trying to figure out why he's there, but he doesn't abuse him in a way to, try to just force him to reveal it. He doesn't threaten him. He doesn't do anything like that. And in fact, in the conversation that they have on the way to their hideout before they're blindfolded, he's talking kind of privately with Frodo, and he reveals to him that, when I started getting really close, or thought I was getting close to the meat of the issue, I realized I should probably pull back, and I started diverting the conversation into other areas because some of this stuff might not best be revealed in front of all of my men, because like when he was interrogating Frodo, literally they were just like in an amphitheater around him. And so there we see his discretion in not trying to out information that, could be dangerous in the wrong hands. So, he realizes that while he may be a super responsible good guy, and no matter what Frodo tells him, it won't turn out badly, some of his other men may have loose lips, or may have, in the wrong situation, bad motives that might lead them to do something dangerous. And so he intentionally steers the conversation a different way so as to avoid revealing too much. Although he reveals to Frodo that I kind of read more in your words than you probably wanted to reveal. But he also tells Frodo, and this kind of goes back to the courtesy angle, he said, "You spoke well in a hard place." So, I mean, he's giving Frodo some credit, but Faramir's a smart guy. I mean, he wasn't born yesterday. He is clearly kind of indicated to be one of the wisest people in the story as a major character anyway. And so he can pick up on a lot of things that Frodo's not intentionally telling, but he manages to get enough information to realize this is probably going into dangerous channels. And then there's a similar kind of instance where when he goes back to Minas Tirith after Gandalf and Pippin have arrived there, he starts having to kind of tell Denethor about his experience with Frodo and Sam. And throughout the conversation, you can tell he's kind of hesitant to reveal everything. Of course, he ends up having to tell them about the ring and whatnot, and Denethor gets kind of mad. But you can also tell from Denethor's remark, he basically says, "Don't think I haven't noticed that you're like looking at Gandalf to make sure that what you're saying is okay." But there again, we see Faramir being discreet, because Faramir rather correctly recognizes Gandalf as being probably the better source of have I gone too far than Denethor, because even he knows that Denethor, as much as he loves Denethor as his father and he wants his approval, he's not just gonna do everything Denethor wants just because. And so he recognizes that Gandalf, who probably knows a lot more about the whole grand scheme of things, he's trying to kind of like get his cues from Gandalf to figure out where he should go with this. So, he ends up having to reveal basically all the main information, but it's still an interesting instance of Faramir trying to at least be discreet and not reveal more than he absolutely has to. Finally, one of the other major characteristics we see in Faramir is just his moral decency. Faramir, unlike Boromir, is a almost absurdly scrupulous person in the good sense of the word. He is a morally scrupulous person in that he will not bend his principles at all. And one of the most interesting tales of this is at one point when he reveals that Boromir has been killed. I mean, he basically asks, Frodo, were you a friend of Boromir, blah, blah, blah. Well, then, would it grieve you to know that he's dead? And Frodo says, well, yes, it would. And then he sees the look in Faramir's face, and he's like, wait, he is dead? Are you just trying to trap me? And Faramir says, I wouldn't snare even an orc with a falsehood. And this is like a real key to Faramir's character. And you can kind of see another element of this in the conversation about the ring when it finally comes up. Earlier, before he realizes what the ring is, he kind of guessed that there was something, perhaps a powerful heirloom or a thing taken from the enemy that was a bone of contention among the company. He kind of gathers this from some of the things that Frodo has said. And in the course of the conversation, he realizes that Boromir was the person with whom the contention was had, at least to some extent, maybe others as well. But and he basically says, realizing that the thing that he's talking about is probably a dangerous thing and a big deal, he says, even if I found it on the side of the highway, I wouldn't pick it up. Realizing what, not realizing that it's the ring, but realizing that it's something important, but also probably dangerous and best left alone. When the ring is finally revealed as the ring, because Sam accidentally blurts it out, unlike in the movie where Gollum kind of reveals it under pressure, uh, Faramir holds himself to that and he says, I would treat what I said earlier as an oath because, what I said I meant, and the men of Gondor will, you know, try to, they will keep their word or die in the attempt, basically, is what he says. And there again, you see the moral scruples. He didn't say at the time, I swear on my honor, I will not take this thing no matter what it is, even if I found out it's the most powerful weapon in the entirety of Middle Earth. He didn't swear an oath, but he said that he would be bound by it as if he swore an oath. And that is a morally scrupulous thing to do. And it's a very significant aspect of his character. And then a final aspect of this is when at one point they're having a conversation and he says, he's talking about the difference between kind of the Riders of Rohan and what the men of Gondor kind of used to be, but are less so now. And he's talking about how the men of Rohan are much more, they like war as just kind of a thing in and of itself. They like warlike sports. They like war for the sake of battle. They're just really into that sort of thing. Gondor didn't used to be like that, but it's become more like that. And he says kind of the main difference is that the men who are warriors still think they need other skills besides just warrior skills, but nevertheless, they now esteem warriors above basically everybody else. And he goes into what is one of my favorite quotes, and I probably should have memorized it, but I don't have it memorized. But he basically says, "I don't love the sword for its sharpness or the spear for the arrow for its swiftness or any of that. I love only that which they defend. War must be while an enemy threatens us, but what he really wants is peace." And that's, to me, another really good indicator of his moral, just his moral strength. Because while a lot of people would say maybe that, it's really martial values or some of the best values, and especially you've got people like the men of Rohan, and even Denethor might even kind of lean this way. We don't get a clear indication of that, but certainly you don't get the idea that Denethor is a morally scrupulous person. We get, he does give a line at one point that what he would really like is just to be like in the old days, ruling Gondor in peace, but that's just because it's to his own aggrandizement as opposed to being at war where his entire rule is threatened. It's not because he just favors peace per se. I'm not so sure that Denethor, if it really came down to it, wouldn't prefer war if it meant him conquering another person to add to the realm of Gondor. Faramir, you don't get the ideas like that at all. Faramir, on the contrary, would much rather just everybody be at peace. There can be other kingdoms. I don't want to aggrandize myself through war. I don't want to be known per se as a warrior. And in fact, what we can gather from Faramir is that he is actually, in a lot of ways, more a scholar than a warrior, although it tells us that he is just as good a leader, or at least very close to as good a leader as Boromir himself, who is one of the greatest captains in Gondor's history, as far as we can tell. So here again, we're just getting another example of, he's not into doing things that are just, doing things for the sake of doing them, especially if they have bad consequences. Kind of like the whole don't kill the animal just because. It may look a little creepy, but, if you don't really know that it's dangerous, don't just shoot it. And so here again, it's kind of the same idea where he's not favoring going out and doing things that are going to cause a lot of destruction, a lot of death, unless it's absolutely necessary. And that, again, speaks to his high moral character. And there's probably other aspects of his character that we could go into that are very similar to this, but I think these three things kind of really, round out kind of what it is in a lot of ways to be a gentleman. Because, if you're courteous and you're discreet and you have a really good moral character, that's going to steer you through most situations that you could possibly find yourself in. And so in that way, I think Faramir is a really good example for all of us. Not saying I live up to it, and I'm sure most people don't these days, but it wouldn't hurt for us to try to emulate him a little more. So, hope you enjoyed that video. I certainly enjoyed, picking through this as a thought process and really looking at some of the different ways in which Faramir behaves. If you can think of any other really good examples or aspects of his character that I should have added to this discussion, please do share those in the comments below. And if you did like the video, please do give it a thumbs up and share it around. You can, of course, follow me on Twitter at JRRTLore for some occasional Tolkien trivia questions. You can subscribe to the channel over here. Don't forget to click that bell icon. You can support the channel over here, and you can find 2 of my previous videos here. Until the next time, I'm the Tolkien Geek signing out for the Tolkien Lore channel. Namaste.